I've been hanging out with another girl in town. At least she doesn't bring me down, down, down.
Remember all the things you and I did first, and now you're doing them with her. Remember all the things you and I did first. She got me like this. Now you're taking her to every restaurant, and everywhere we went, come on. Now you're taking her to every restaurant. You got me like this. Boy, you can say anything you want. It don't mean a thing, no one else can have you. Want you back, yeah, I want you back.
I broke it off thinking you'd be fine, but now I feel sick looking at you cry. And I want us back, yeah, I want us back.
Please rid me of the jealousy. You know you belong with me, and I'm gonna make you see, see, see.
You clearly didn't think it through, 'cause I did everything for you, and now I don't know what to do.
Remember all the things you and I did first, and now you're doing them with her. Remember all the things you and I did first. She got me like this. Now you're taking her to every restaurant, and everywhere we went, come on. Now you're taking her to every restaurant. You got me like this. Boy, you can say anything you want. It don't mean a thing, no one else can have you. Want you back, yeah, I want you back.
I broke it off thinking you'd be fine, but now I feel sick looking at you cry. And I want us back, yeah, I want us back. Ooh, I thought
Good morning, grasshoppers. In honor of Paul Morphy's birthday, we're going to start with a very quick game, probably one of the earliest that I know of. Paul Morphy is playing black in the year 1855. Now, he was born in 1837, so that would make him about 12 years old. No, 37. 47, make him about 18 years old. So he wasn't necessarily that young when he went to Europe. He graduated law school early and had to wait in order to be able to practice law. He's a brilliant young man, and his keys coordination was beyond those of his day. Basically, in this particular example, almost all of the games began with the open game. Now, the open game is primarily named an open game because of knight f3, and after the move knight c6, white can open the game at will. Therefore, the games that begin with d4 and d5 on the first move are termed closed games, as it's very difficult to open lines so easily. And often pawn play is required in order to orchestrate and engineer open lines for rooks and the bishops later on. So, in this particular example, Paul Morphy, of course, cannot let white have a big classical center. So e takes d4 is easily understood, and white goes for rapid development. Now, there are two primary ways that black can try to fight for the center in this particular case. Black can choose knight f6, and after the move e5, must punch at the center with d5. So let's take a look at that briefly. And the counterplay against this bishop allows for this knight to outpost itself in the center, although Magnus Carlsen has also played as black knight to g4 in this position in order to mix it up against his very, very strong opponents. But the traditional move is still the main line, and it still scores very well for black. I should also mention that after knight takes d4, the passive move bishop to d7 although it still works, is not as aggressive as the move bishop to c5, which was preferred by someone against Ivanchuk at one point in recent memory. An American player whose name slips me at the moment. So Hikaru Nakamura has been on the white side of this as long ago as 2015 against Alexander Onishuk. So this opening can still be played at the highest levels. Basically, Nakamura chose bishop to e3 in this particular position rather than the lackluster castles. Basically, after castles, black also gets the castle, and if white attempts any unusual endeavors such as f3, this move could actually be met, interestingly enough, by a rather shocking move. I think I actually saw f6 in this position at one time, although I don't think this is the position at the moment. Bishop takes d4 is good enough. Perhaps it's after bishop to d3, bishop to e3. In any event, in today's game, Paul Morphy chose to develop his bishop to c5 to avoid the pawn push. He was very much against the loss of time in the opening. After all, our three main principles are control of the center, activating all of our pieces to the best of our ability without moving the same piece twice unless necessary, and king safety. Now, we don't wish to incur any loss of time in the opening, so therefore in this particular position, white branches out immediately with a tactic not only to f7 trying to weaken the king, but also targeting this bishop on c5, which is a weakness. And this brings us to our three most instructive questions that you should ask yourself every time your opponent moves. Where are the weaknesses? What's the opponent's big idea? And which are the worst or best placed pieces? Which, what, and where? What's the opponent's big idea? To capture on f7. Where's the weakness? c5. But Paul Morphy, of course, equalizes easily with knight to h6, and although he does get displaced quite a bit by knight takes f7, knight takes f7, bishop takes f7 check, king takes f7, queen to h5 check, Paul Morphy actually gets quite a bit of development here, as the loss of time and the queen moving twice in order to capture the bishop on c5. We can already see that in this position that black has an active knight, a queen, a rook ready to come in. As the king not being castled is not that big of a deal, Paul Morphy tags the queen with d6, enabling the other bishop to come out very quickly. Now, if white plays bishop, queen to c4 check, bishop to e6 continues, developing our pieces, and although white may or may not have the better pawn structure, this pawn is very annoying. Alexander Beaufort Meek chose queen to b5, trying to resist the development of the bishop because of the pawn on b7 that would be hanging. However, Paul Morphy was never one to shy away from rapid development, activating his rook to e8. Now, the stronger player gets their rooks to the right squares at every moment, whenever they can. The stronger player gets the rooks to the right squares faster and better than their opponents very often. Just a note to self. So in this particular case, Beaufort Meek loses further time with queen to b3 check, and this gives Morphy a chance to tuck his king away on g7. However, which is probably the best move, but Paul Morphy insists on trying to open up lines. Meek was a fairly good player. I would say he was relatively master level for those days. I believe he was a judge in the Louisiana Supreme Court. And I'm not sure what role Paul Morphy's father had, but basically if you visit Paul Morphy's Steakhouse on Royal Street, 254 Brennan Street, it's now, Royal Street, it's now Brennan Steakhouse. Directly across the street just down the block is the expanse of the Louisiana State Courthouse in New Orleans. So it was very common for him to consider practicing law. He may have been an intern for Judge Alexander Beaufort Meek at the time. I do plan on doing a little bit more research, as every time a world champion's birthday surfaces, I try to get a little bit more into them and use their games for instruction. Now, if White were following those three principles that we talked about, basically king safety or being aware of the safety of your king, you don't always have to castle. In the modern semi-closed games such as the Sicilian and French defense, you don't necessarily wish to castle so quickly, but wait for the moment to choose which side to place your king on. Don't just castle because you can, you castle because you want to. And I think Judge Alexander Beaufort Meek's next move is perhaps easily the cause of his rapid collapse, because the short diagonal of danger involved here is too much, for example. Too much. So Paul Morphy doesn't spot this immediately. I know he might have even considered the rook sacrifice, but he liked to get his pieces into the game. But you can tell based on his youth that he's setting up a trap. He wants the queen to capture on d5, so he plays this rather inaccurate knight to a5 move. And of course, Alexander Beaufort Meek should probably return his queen to the king side via b5, which he somewhat ignores. He takes the direct route. Let's just say he takes the direct route to trying to get his queen to the king side. And this incurs further loss of time after e takes e4. Notice that from b5, we wouldn't be losing time, but we even have the right to castle. But because our queen is attacked, Meek recaptures on e4 with f takes e4, and this allows the queen to come in with quite a bit of vengeance. Now, king f1, unfortunately, possibly the safest move. However, it's very difficult to see that, as Morphy is about to bring every piece into the game with a vengeance after g3. And as much as I would like to use our timer just now, the in-between move, notice that because the queen is attacked, it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to move it. We can actually attack a much more valuable piece with rook takes e4 check. Now, of course, all of the poetry would be lost if Paul Morphy had played the best move, which was queen takes e4. And of course, Meek would go on to win the game, but they were into glory and all of that. Basically, there are very few squares for the king to move to, and Morphy's advantage is still significant. The king attempts to run out of it while allowing himself the opportunity to play rook f1. And in this particular example, there are several moves that Paul Morphy could have played. However, the most obvious one is the one that he played. Queen to f6 would have been the best move. Instead, queen to e7 kind of throws away all of White's advantage. This was our chance to improve on Paul Morphy and use our timer. I wasn't expecting that. From what I remember of this game, after queen e7, knight to d2, he corrects his course shortly after the move rook e3. c6, still gaining time on the queen at the expense of the knight. Of course, if the knight is captured, White would lose control of the square e2, and we see this theme recurring in a number of games, by the way. So the queen stays on that diagonal by playing queen to f1. And for this moment, we're going to look for candidates for black. How to continue the attack. If I can spell it properly. Typing at an angle. So, black to move in this position, and of course if you're watching this on demand, you can pause the video for more time. I'm hoping to do this and perhaps one other game, depending on how much time we have.
Said BHKFBG.
King G7, perhaps? Instead of King F7. Bishop G4. King G8, King G7. Both of those moves are among the top 3. Bishop G4, obviously. Nice work, Ron. Ladies and gentlemen, Ron Hay. One of our great supporters of the channel. If you haven't yet subscribed, now is the time to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And make sure you click on the bell for notifications of new videos. And in this particular case, or in the fact that we go live, AB-Morphy does choose to move Bishop H3, perhaps the most forceful move available. And almost everything that White does at this point is going to lead to checkmate. Basically, giving up the queen was White's best option. However, he chooses the only safe square that keeps control of the E2 square. And now, how does AB-Morphy begin to finish him? Candidate moves for black. In this particular position, may well be one of our shortest videos, as this is one of our shortest games. I will redo the Morphy versus the Duke and the Count game, as that game is very powerful and illustrative of all of the principles that we need in the modern era to understand chess. It is the equivalent of the scales for every musician, being able to perform do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do with every instrument. If you are playing an instrument up and down the scales, is the equivalent of all the piece coordination that you will need to know. I'll be very surprised if anyone gets this one. Well, Rook D3 does threaten checkmate. But I'm not entirely sure how useful it is. Perhaps D3 instead of Rook to D3 is a candidate move. Preparing the move. Rook to E2 check and Queen to E3 checkmate. Instead, AB-Morphy, following our previous attribution to
Tamer Robbie
Said RF.
yes, indeed. Indeed, Tamering Bay. Tamering Robbie. Tamering Robbie. Rook to F8. Rook to F8 indeed was the move that was played by AB-Morphy. Using the rooks as after all, I even noticed it yesterday watching another streamer who is weaker in strength than many others. They just did not get their pieces into the game very quickly or fast at all. So for the most part, after the move Knight F3, AB-Morphy was a bit dramatic here to a certain extent, although it is the best move. I might have chosen King to G8. Takes a little bit longer to checkmate, given I can't even imagine Rook F1. I can't even imagine why it takes one move longer to mate without the king on E8. But AB-Morphy chose to move King to E8, and White resigned in this position. I also considered the possibility of trying to checkmate prior to this move, with the idea of Rook takes F3, overlooking the fact that the Queen can recapture with check. That's always awkward, but King to E8 forced White to resign. Now, a logical continuation might have been Meek did not inherit the earth at all. No, thank you, Paul. As it turns out, in this particular position, Meek could have probably continued with either Rook E1 or Rook F1. I know that a student who had previously suggested Rook to F1 it runs into exactly the same problem as after queen to e4, king to g1. Is there any other move? Rook on f takes f3, threatening checkmate in a variety of ways. We keep open the option of recapturing on e3 with a different checkmating pattern. Or does it change a thing? I don't know that it changes a thing for the most part. If bishop takes e3, rook takes g3 check, followed by mate either on g2 or e3. Instead of resigning, he could have also tried maybe rook to e1, but still after rook on f takes f3, queen takes f3, rook takes f3 check, it will soon be made after queen takes e1. That wayward knight just looks very awkward here. But as it turns out, I hope you enjoyed this game. It is interesting that Judge Meek knew about the center and the fighting for the open lines and the tactics involved in picking off the bishop on c5. It's also interesting that Morphy chose the move bishop c5 over knight f6, which is chosen by Magnus Carlsen in these positions in the modern era. Knight to g5, knight h6, knight takes, bishop takes, king takes, check. And unfortunately, in many of these positions, I think that the logical move, king to g7, should be played. And in this particular position, queen h4, followed by queen h3, or even capturing with check and picking off the rook, would be better. However, knight a5 removed the defender of the d5 pawn. After all, maybe he was worried about queen takes d5 after the queen departs. And it all worked out for him very, very well, as he demonstrated a tremendous amount of piece coordination here. Queen to f6 would have been much more rapid in the development department. But after the move queen e7, knight to d2, rook e3, we get to see Paul Morphy at his finest, coordinating all available resources for the attack, and I'm positive that none of the continuations that were available to Meek were worth playing on, and he knew that he was playing a very strong young man in this particular case. Thank you all for being here. Please follow me on my socials. I am FIDE trainer and National Master John MacArthur. Been teaching chess since 1984. I've been a FIDE trainer since 2016, and I've been a professional coach since around 2000. When 9/11 forced me, 2001, 2000, the end of the Y2K, when I was a programmer, I more or less converted over to teaching pretty much full time. Thank you. Cheers and ciao, everyone. We will send this over to... Where is Kingslayer Slow? He's not here. C'est la vie. We'll send you over to the next available person. Interestingly enough, also a warrior in her own right.
Fall 1-4
said he ended his stream and raided Lyle.
Oh, really? Lyle? I don't know if I know Lyle. I'm going to send it over to Lily. Thank you all for being here. Cheers and ciao. Thank you, Paul, for returning. I don't know that I have time to do another one before I have to rush out the door, but thank you very much. Talk to everyone soon.